Many scientists have looked at genetics in order to understand how life is the way it is today. And so Chapter 7 talks a lot about changes over time. And one of the most famous scientists who studied changes over time is Charles Darwin. In 1831, he set out on a 5-year trip around the world. While on this trip, the path of which can be seen here, he observed plants and animals that he had never seen before, and, like a true scientist, wondered why they were so different from those that were found in England. He found great diversity. In fact, when we discuss diversity, we use the word species to describe groups of similar organisms that are capable of mating with each other and can produce fertile offspring. He saw diversity in the species that he found in his travels. Fossils were important records that he used in order to try and piece together the changes that he believed occurred over time. Fossils are preserved remains or traces of an organism that lived in the past. From the work that he did in the Galapagos Islands, he was able to hypothesize that a small number of different plants and animal species had in fact come to the Galapagos from the mainland, but had become different and changed over time through the process of reproduction. He believed that adaptation was a trait that helps an organism survive and reproduce in its environment. And he used this evidence to help work on the development of the philosophy of evolution. The idea of evolution is that gradual change in a species over time occurs. He reasoned that plants and animals that arrived on Galapagos faced different environmental factors, and that gradually over time, over the course of many generations, they changed in order to be best adapted to the environment. One of the ways that he suggested this occurred was through the process of what he called natural selection. The idea of natural selection is that individuals that are better adapted to an environment are the ones that are most likely to survive and reproduce, and that than the other members of the species. So an example might include if birds are located in an environment where the flowers are very narrow and deep and the food is located at the bottom. If we were to examine these two options of beaks, the bird with the longer, thinner beak will be the best able to access the food at the bottom of the flower than compared to perhaps a bird with a shorter, thicker beak. He used his research and his travels in order to find evidence to support the ideas of evolution and natural selection. And there are several ideas that he pieced together. The first big idea was that he found similarities in body structure. So, for example, comparative anatomy. When he looked at a comparison of structures that were essentially comparative parts, he was able to see that there were some homologous structures. Remember, homo means same, so homologous structures refer to similar structures that are all related and inherited from a common ancestor. While these parts may not look homologous, if we examine the coloration, we can see that they are. Here we're looking at a dolphin, a bird, and a dog, and we're looking at their fins, wings, or legs, but what you can see is that in this comparison, they all have, although they are different according to the adaptations of the species itself, have the same specific parts as each other. So he used this comparative anatomy, the homologous structures, as one piece of evidence to support his idea of evolution. The second piece of evidence he used was that there were similarities in early development. For example, before birth, all vertebrates have a tail and rows of tiny slits in their throats that, by the time they are born, usually are no longer there in humans. The third piece of evidence he used was that he found that there were similarities in DNA and proteins between different animals and similar species. For example, according to the National Geographic, humans and chimpanzees share 96% of the same DNA. In fact, we are so similar with chimpanzees that the difference is 10 times smaller than the difference between mice and rats.